So let's talk about resource monitoring in Azure. And what I'm talking about here is monitoring different resources like virtual machines or what have you, storage accounts, whatever, in Azure. Now, um, we already talked in a previous video about setting up alerts on specific resources, but we can also capture log and other data on those particular resources. Now, because when you create the resource monitoring, it takes it a little while for you to be able to catch things. So I've already done it. So I'm not actually going to walk through doing it. I'm going to show you how to do it. But then I'm going to show you where I can access some of that information. So let's start with this. We're going to start by setting up a workspace. Now, we need a log analytics workspace in order to be able to capture some of this information. So we're going to go to log analytics and we'll see right here log analytics workspaces. Alternatively, if you come here to all services and find monitor, here's your log analytics workspaces as well. All right, you see I've already got a couple of them created. Default resource group. This was created obviously by default. VM logs, this is the one I created in my little demonstrations resource group. Okay, let me show you how you would create an analytics workspace. And the reason you do this, by the way, there's two components. We're going to create a workspace, and then we're going to go into a separate area, monitor, and we're going to set up a rule that's going to capture data and store it in the workspace. So in our log analytics workspace, we would create an analytics workspace. We would give it a name. I'm going to go ahead and walk through this. I'm not going to save it, but I'm going to walk through it for you. So I'm going to call this test because it's not going to last. So demonstrations, test, and really that's it, right? We've got our tags and we've got our review and create. And that's pretty much it. And that creates the workspace. Now, I've already got one, so I'm not going to create another one. You can actually create more than one, however, if you want to, for security reasons, to keep logs separate, however you want to do it. So let me go back to my log analytics workspaces here. Now that I've created an analytics workspace, I'm going to create a rule, and we're going to do that using monitor. So I'm going to search for monitor, and you're going to find that right here. If you go to all services, you can find monitor, and I think they actually hit it somewhere in here. There we go. Monitoring tools, monitor. Okay, so from monitor, under settings, what I'm looking for is this data collector rules. So monitor, lots of stuff here. But we're going to go to settings and data collector rules. And that's going to set up our collector rules. And that's where we're going to tell it where we want to capture information. So here's how we do this. We create a data collector rule. And again, I'm going to do this do the same thing. I'm not actually going to, I'm West US 2 for my demonstrations. Platform type, I can choose Windows, Linux, all, and then data collector endpoint if needed. So you don't always need to use a data collector endpoint. Notice what it says here is optional for collecting Windows event logs, Linux syslogs, or performance counters. If you can capture anything else, you got to have it. So let's do, I'm going to do this as Linux because my two VMs right now are Linux. Now, this one we're going to set a little bit more information. So I'm going to go to my resources, and the resources are the things that I'm actually going to capture data from. So I can add a resource here, and in my demonstrations, I can find my virtual machines and select both of them, and then see if it's going to complain. I already have them logged in somewhere else, so that's fine. And then next we're going to collect and deliver. So what is it that we want to collect? Now, this is going to vary based on what we're trying to capture data from. So these are Linux VMs. So when I go to add a data source, it's going to give me, here's what I can capture. I can capture performance counters or the Linux syslog. So performance counters, then I just select what I want, what the sample rate is, choose basic performance counters, do custom things, do none, whatever, that would be hilarious. Select which ones I want, which ones I don't, and then I'm going to put the destination in. So I'm going to switch this to syslog, and then I get to choose which log and which level. So let's say I want my sys log and I want, let's do notice or higher. Let's pick another one here. Let's do for the alert log, we're going to do notice or higher. For the audit log, actually, let's do the authentication log. We're going to do info. And then we're going to set our destination. And this is where we need, come up here, this is where we need to set where we're sending that to. So my VM logs is the workspace I'd already created. Now, this is why we had to create that workspace first. If we don't have a workspace, then we have no place to collect our data source. Okay, so I'm going to send it to place we already have and add our data source, and then it's just tags and review and create. Okay, now I've already done that, so I'm not going to create this. So I'm going to come back to monitor, and in my monitor, my data collector rules, here I can manage here's my data collector rule. It's the temp rule that I created earlier. And then I can look at my data sources and Linux syslog, and then it's going to tell me minimum logging or which type, what I want. And here's where I select what I want. Again, if I want to change it. And then here's where my resources are, temp 1, temp 2. So I can select those, and there we go. All right, and then I can, as I add more virtual machines that are running in Linux, I can basically add them into my data collector rule here, and using that DCR, it'll start capturing all of that data at the same place. Okay, there we go. And notice it's not giving me the option to change anything because, or to save anything because I haven't changed anything. Okay, so if I added a new VM, select it, then I could save it. Okay, so we're capturing that information. Now, once you tell it to do that, it's going to take probably 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes before they actually start collecting. And then the other thing is, or before the event logs actually start showing up. And then the other thing is you actually have to have something going on for it to be able to collect data. So if your system is not actually recording any events because nothing's happening on it, well, we're not going to go anywhere. So for example, at the moment, one of my virtual machines is turned off, the other one is turned on. So I'm going to come back to, let me go to all services, and I'm going to find my log analytics workspace again. I'm going to open up my VM logs, and this has been sitting here for a couple of hours while I've been in meetings. So now that I have it, I can actually start looking at activity. So I'm going to come to my activity log, and in my activity log, so I've got my create workspace, I can look at monitoring, I can look at alerts, metrics, diagnostic settings. I can look at activity or directory activity. So using this information, I can start exploring what's actually going on my systems. And this is why we try to capture all of this data. Let me go to my logs here, and we're going to see something. So here are tons and tons and tons of resources. So I filter this down to virtual machine queries. Right? So I can pick resources, I can do search, I can do by resource type. Right here, I can pick my resource type, I can add other filters. So I'm going to search for virtual machines. So pick my virtual machines, and add that as a, whoops, I didn't want to add that as a filter. So here are some of my virtual machine resources. Whoops, virtual machines. There we go. So here are some of my virtual machine queries that I can run. Virtual machines failed, total virtual machines in a cluster. So now that I have this, I can start looking for, depending on what I captured, I can start looking for, let's look at my shutdown virtual machines. I'm going to go ahead and run this query. It's right in my query right here. Here's where the query is. This is a saved query, right? So I can create my own queries and try to run them or modify existing queries. This is taking it a little while to run, unfortunately. And we're going to see what this comes back with from the data that I've collected. It said it didn't find any. Interesting. Let's take a look at, I'm going to search for something. I'm going to search for heartbeat. Track VM availability using heartbeat. That's a virtual machine scale set. Let me do a count heartbeats. Here we go. So I'm going to do a count heartbeats, and then I can run my query. Now, one thing to bear in mind, says it didn't have anything. Okay, wait a minute. What do you mean? I have a virtual machine up. Okay, before we do that, let me go to select scope. And from my select scope, I can choose what I want it to run against. So let me run this against temp VM1, temp VM2. Let me apply that and then run it and see what we get. We're still not finding any data. It should be pulling data from one of mine. Let me go ahead and pause this and see if I can figure it out. Okay, thanks for your patience where I went to figure out what my problem was. The problem was I think I put two things together, two queries together. So let me show you something else here. I can add another query by clicking here. And here this gives me just a basic query, completely empty. I can type my own. I can select scope. I'm going to leave this as temp VM2. I can set the time range, and then I can find here different queries. So let me do the last heartbeat of each computer. So I'm going to double click on that, and that's going to load this last heartbeat of each computer into this query window, and then I can run it. And now we're getting data. So temp VM2, time generated, source computer, computer ID. Okay, this is the last time I got a heartbeat from temp VM2. Just for the fun of it, let me change my scope. I'm going to include temp VM. And then I am going to rerun my query. And it has not gotten a heartbeat within the last 24 hours, actually, from temp VM, which is appropriate because temp VM is completely shut down. Just out of curiosity, let me do the last 7 days. And then I can run my query. Yep, still haven't gotten a temp heartbeat from temp VM. Makes sense. Machine's been down ever since I actually created my workspace to start capturing data. Okay, so now using the Log Analytics workspace, we can start trying to capture data from the computer resources. So remember, we created the Log Analytics workspace. We went to monitor. We set up the data collector rule. We had to wait for a while for it to start collecting data. And then I've been using heartbeats here to illustrate it because I've got nothing going on these VMs, so I couldn't capture any syslog entries anyway. But there we go. That is your introduction to monitoring resources in Azure.